The morning sun cast long shadows across Camp Pendleton as Sarah Martinez carefully disassembled the Barrett .50 caliber sniper rifle on the metal workbench. Her movements were precise and methodical, each component placed in its exact position as she had done countless times before. The weapon cleaning bay was quiet, except for the soft scraping of her cleaning rod against the barrel's interior. Sarah had been working as a civilian contractor for the Marine Corps for 3 years now. Her job was simple enough: maintain and clean the specialized weapons that came through the armory. Most people saw her as just another face in the crowd, a quiet woman in her late 20s who kept to herself and did her work without complaint. She preferred it that way. What nobody knew was that Sarah Martinez wasn't really Sarah Martinez at all. Born Elena Volkov in a small town outside Moscow, she had spent her childhood learning things most kids never even dreamed about. Her father, a former Spetsnaz operative, had trained her from the age of 8 in marksmanship, hand-to-hand combat, and weapons maintenance. By 15, she could field strip an AK-47 blindfolded and hit a target at 800 meters with iron sights. Her path to America had been complicated and dangerous. After her father's death in a training accident when she was 19, Elena had discovered documents that revealed his true work, not just as a special forces soldier, but as someone who had been secretly feeding information to Western intelligence agencies for years. When his handlers learned of his death, they offered Elena a choice: continue his work or face the consequences of his betrayal becoming known to Russian authorities. She chose America. The transition hadn't been easy. New identity, new language, new life. But Elena had always been adaptable. Sarah Martinez became real through careful documentation and patient work by people whose names she never learned. Her Russian accent faded with practice, replaced by the neutral tones of someone from nowhere in particular. Now, as she worked on the Barrett, she allowed herself to remember the weight of a similar rifle in her hands years ago. The Dragunov SVD her father had taught her on felt different, but the principles were the same. Breath control, trigger squeeze, follow-through. She could still hear his voice in her head, speaking in rapid Russian as he corrected her stance. The sound of boots on concrete made her look up. A group of Marines was approaching the cleaning station, led by a man she'd seen around the base but never spoken to directly. Commander James Mitchell was known throughout Camp Pendleton as one of the most experienced SEAL operators still on active duty. His reputation preceded him: multiple deployments, commendations for valor, and a quiet intensity that made even hardened Marines step aside when he walked past. "Morning, Sarah," said Sergeant Rodriguez, one of the Marines she worked with regularly. "Commander Mitchell here needs some work done on his team's rifles." "Crush job," Sarah nodded, wiping her hands on a rag. "What kind of timeline are we looking at?" Mitchell stepped forward, his gray eyes studying her with an intensity that made her slightly uncomfortable. "We deploy in 6 hours. Need a full inspection and cleaning on 4 M110s and 2 Barretts."
"Can you handle that?"
"Of course," Sarah replied, already calculating the time needed. "I'll have them ready in 4 hours." "Good." Mitchell handed her a clipboard with the weapon serial numbers. As their fingers briefly touched during the exchange, Sarah noticed the small scar on his knuckle and the callus pattern on his trigger finger. This was a man who knew his weapons intimately. The Marines left their rifles and departed, but Mitchell lingered for a moment. "You're new here," he said, though it wasn't really a question. 3 years isn't exactly new," Sarah replied, beginning to arrange the weapons on her workbench. "New to me," Mitchell corrected. "I've been deployed for most of the last 2 years. Just got back last month." He paused, watching as she began her initial inspection of the first rifle. "You know these weapons well?" Sarah kept her expression neutral. "It's my job. Most civilian contractors I've worked with need the manual open just to remember which end the bullet comes out of." Mitchell's tone was conversational, but Sarah could feel him studying her every movement. "You handle that Barrett like you've been using them your whole life." A small alarm bell went off in Sarah's mind. She forced herself to slow down, to move with less confidence, to fumble slightly with the bolt carrier group. "I've always been good with my hands," she said simply. Mitchell watched for another moment, then nodded. 4 hours, he repeated, and walked away. Sarah waited until he was completely out of sight before allowing herself to breathe normally again. In her 3 years at Camp Pendleton, no one had ever looked at her the way Mitchell just had. She'd been careful to appear competent but not exceptional, skilled but not suspiciously so. She returned to her work, but her mind was racing. Mitchell was clearly more observant than most of the people she worked with. In her experience, men like him, true professionals, had an instinct for things that didn't quite fit. They noticed details that others missed, patterns that seemed wrong. As she cleaned the first M110, Sarah found herself remembering her handler's warnings from years ago. The hardest part isn't becoming someone else, Agent Collins had told her during one of their early meetings. It's staying someone else when your real training wants to show through. Muscle memory doesn't lie, Elena. Neither do instincts. She'd been Elena then, still adjusting to her new name and identity. Now she was fully Sarah Martinez, at least on the surface. But underneath, in the way she moved, the way she thought, the way she assessed threats and opportunities, she was still her father's daughter. Sarah forced herself to focus on the work. Each rifle needed to be perfect. These men's lives depended on their weapons functioning flawlessly. Whatever Mitchell suspected or didn't suspect could wait. For now, she was just a contractor doing her job. But as she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Mitchell's questions had been casual, almost friendly, but there had been something underneath them. A probing quality that suggested he was looking for something specific. 3 years of careful anonymity might be coming to an end. 3 hours and 45 minutes later, Sarah was putting the finishing touches on the last Barrett when Commander Mitchell returned. She had worked steadily, methodically, forcing herself to maintain the careful balance between competence and unremarkable skill that had kept her safe for 3 years. Ahead of schedule, Mitchell observed, approaching the workbench where 6 pristine rifles lay in perfect order. "I work efficiently," Sarah replied, beginning to pack her cleaning supplies. She had learned long ago that the best way to handle questions was to give simple, honest answers that revealed nothing important. Mitchell picked up one of the M110s, checking the action with practiced movements. His inspection was thorough but quick. This was clearly a man who knew exactly what to look for. "Clean work," he said after a moment. "Very clean." Sarah nodded her thanks, but something in his tone made her glance up. Mitchell was holding the rifle in a way that seemed casual, but she noticed his finger placement, his stance, the way his eyes tracked across the weapon's surface. He was testing something. "Mind if I ask where you learned to work on these particular models?" Mitchell's question seemed innocent enough, but Sarah's training kicked in. Questions about background, about skills, about origins. These were always dangerous. "Training courses," she said simply. "The Corps requires certification for all their civilian contractors." "Of course." Mitchell set the rifle down and picked up one of the Barretts. "It's just that most people who learn from courses have a certain way of doing things. By the book, you know. But your work," he paused, examining the bolt assembly. "There are some modifications here. Small ones. The kind that improve performance but aren't in any manual." Sarah's heart rate increased, but she kept her expression neutral. During her cleaning, her muscle memory had taken over. She'd made tiny adjustments. Worn spots filed smooth, springs tensioned just slightly differently, contact points polished to reduce friction. All things her father had taught her. Techniques passed down through generations of Russian military tradition. "I sometimes see ways to improve things," she said carefully. "Experience teaches you where problems usually develop." Mitchell nodded slowly, but his gray eyes never left her face. "Experience, right?" He was quiet for a moment, then continued in a more conversational tone. "You know, I've worked with a lot of armorers over the years. Military and civilian. Different countries, different training backgrounds. Funny thing about training, it leaves a signature. Russian weapons maintenance, for instance, has a very distinctive approach." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I wouldn't know about that," she said, zipping up her tool bag with hands that she willed to remain steady. "No, probably not." Mitchell's tone was light, almost friendly. "Although some of these techniques," he gestured toward the Barrett, "they're very similar to modifications I've seen on Dragunov rifles. Spetsnaz armorers specifically." Sarah stood slowly, her mind racing through options. Deny everything? Run? Attack? Her father's training provided multiple scenarios, but none of them ended well. Instead, she decided on a different approach, partial truth. "My grandfather served in World War II, she said quietly. "He was captured by the Russians for 2 years before escaping. Picked up some of their techniques during his time there. He taught my father, who taught me. It was a plausible story, one that explained her knowledge without revealing the truth. Mitchell considered this for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Interesting family history, he said finally. Your grandfather must have been quite observant during his captivity. He was a survivor, Sarah replied. Which was absolutely true, even if it wasn't about her grandfather. Mitchell began loading the rifles onto a cart, and for a moment Sarah thought the dangerous conversation was over. Then he paused and looked at her directly. Sarah Martinez from El Paso, Texas. Graduated from UT with a degree in mechanical engineering. No military service, but somehow ended up working on military weapons. His recitation was matter-of-fact, but each word felt like a nail in a coffin. Clean background check, good work record, no red flags. Sarah said nothing. There was nothing to say. The thing is, Mitchell continued, I have a pretty good memory for faces, and I could swear I've seen you before. Not here, not in Texas, somewhere else entirely. I have one of those faces, Sarah said weakly. Mitchell smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Maybe. Or maybe you and I should have a longer conversation sometime. Away from here. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Sarah understood that Mitchell suspected something significant, and he was giving her a chance to come clean voluntarily, rather than forcing the issue. It was almost gentlemanly in a way that spoke to military professionalism. I'm just a contractor, Sarah said. I clean weapons and go home to my apartment. There's nothing interesting about me. Everyone's interesting in some way, Mitchell replied. Take me, for instance. I've spent the last 15 years in some very interesting places, meeting very interesting people. Syria, Afghanistan, Eastern Europe. You'd be surprised how small the world of specialized military personnel really is. Eastern Europe. Sarah felt another chill. Mitchell had been in her part of the world, probably working with local assets. People who might have known her father or known of him. I'm sure you have fascinating stories, Sarah said, shouldering her bag. But I really need to get these tools back to the supply room. Mitchell stepped aside to let her pass, but as she walked by, he spoke quietly. Sarah, if you ever want to talk about your grandfather's experiences during the war, I'd be very interested to hear them. I'm something of a history buff when it comes to irregular warfare. Sarah paused at the doorway. I don't really know many details. It was a long time ago, of course. But if you remember anything or if any old family stories come back to you, you know where to find me. Mitchell's tone was casual, but the underlying message was clear. This conversation wasn't over. Sarah walked away as calmly as she could manage, but her mind was spinning. Mitchell knew something, or at least suspected something. The question was how much and what he planned to do about it. As she returned her tools to their proper places, Sarah began making mental preparations. Emergency procedures, escape routes, contingency plans, all the things her handlers had drilled into her but she'd hoped never to use. 3 years of careful anonymity were definitely coming to an end. Sarah spent the rest of the day trying to maintain her normal routine, but everything felt different now. Every glance from a passing Marine seemed suspicious. Every casual conversation might be gathering intelligence. By evening, she had convinced herself that she was overreacting. Mitchell was observant, yes, but that didn't mean he actually knew anything concrete. She was wrong. The knock on her apartment door came at 9:47 p.m. Sarah checked the peephole and saw Mitchell standing in the hallway, wearing civilian clothes and carrying what looked like a bottle of wine. To anyone watching, it would appear to be a social visit. We need to talk, he said when she opened the door. Sarah considered her options quickly. She could refuse, but that would only confirm his suspicions. She could run, but where would she go? Her emergency protocols required at least 12 hours to activate, and Mitchell was clearly not going to wait that long. About what? She asked, not moving aside to let him in. About why Elena Volkov is pretending to be Sarah Martinez. Mitchell's voice was quiet, but the words hit like a physical blow. Sarah's training took over. In one smooth motion, she stepped back and reached for the knife she kept hidden behind the doorframe. But Mitchell was faster, his hand clamping around her wrist before the blade cleared its sheath. Easy, he said calmly. I'm not here to arrest you. If I was, we'd be having this conversation in a much less comfortable place. Sarah stared at him, her mind racing. He knew her real name. That was impossible unless... Your intelligence, she said. Mitchell smiled grimly. Very good. May I come in? What I have to say isn't really hallway conversation. Against every instinct she possessed, Sarah stepped aside. Mitchell entered her small apartment, glancing around with professional interest. She noticed him cataloging exits, sightlines, potential weapons. This was a man who thought tactically even in civilian settings. Nice place, he said, setting the wine bottle on her kitchen counter. Very clean. Very anonymous. The kind of place someone chooses when they don't want to attract attention. What do you want? Sarah asked directly. She remained standing near the door, ready to bolt if necessary. Mitchell turned to face her, his expression serious. 3 months ago I was in Kiev. Interesting trip. Met with some former Soviet military personnel who had worked with Western intelligence over the years. Your father's name came up. Sarah felt the floor drop out from under her. If Mitchell had been talking to her father's old contacts, then he knew everything. The entire carefully constructed story of Sarah Martinez was about to collapse. I don't know what you're talking about, she said automatically, but the words sounded hollow even to her. Dmitry Volkov, Mitchell continued, Spetsnaz operator turned asset. Provided intelligence on Russian military capabilities for 12 years before his death in 2019. Left behind a daughter who disappeared shortly after his funeral. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. There was no point in continuing the deception. How long have you known? I suspected something the moment I saw you work on those rifles. Confirmed it when I ran your prints through some very classified databases. Mitchell moved to her small couch and sat down, clearly trying to appear non-threatening. Elena Volkov, age 28, trained in weapons and tactics by her father from childhood. Disappeared from Russia 6 years ago, presumably dead according to official records. And now? Sarah asked. Now you're Sarah Martinez, civilian contractor, living quietly in California and apparently trying very hard not to be noticed. Mitchell leaned forward slightly. The question is why? Are you here on assignment? Deep cover? Waiting for activation? Sarah almost laughed. Assignment? I'm here because I had no choice. When my father died, his handlers gave me an ultimatum. Cooperate or face the consequences of his betrayal becoming known. Mitchell's expression shifted slightly. You're not an active agent. I'm a refugee, Sarah said bitterly. A very well-trained refugee, but a refugee nonetheless. They gave me a new identity and told me to disappear. So I disappeared. Who's they? Sarah shook her head. I was never told names. Agency, probably. Maybe military intelligence. Does it matter? Mitchell was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. So you've been here for 3 years, just existing, no contact with handlers? No missions? No contact with anyone, Sarah confirmed. That was the deal. They wanted me gone, forgotten. I wanted to stay alive. But you kept your skills sharp. Sarah gestured around her apartment. What else was I going to do? Forget everything my father taught me? Pretend I'm someone I'm not? Aren't you already doing that? Mitchell asked gently. The question hit harder than Sarah expected. She had been pretending to be Sarah Martinez for so long that sometimes she almost believed it herself. But underneath she was still Elena Volkov, still her father's daughter, still carrying skills and knowledge that set her apart from everyone around her. Why are you here? She asked instead of answering. What do you want from me? Mitchell stood and walked to her window, looking out at the parking lot below. 2 weeks ago, my team lost our primary sniper. IED in Syria. Good man, great shooter, irreplaceable in the field. Sarah felt a chill of understanding. You want me to replace him? I want you to consider it, Mitchell corrected. We have a mission coming up. High priority specialized target. Requires someone with very specific skills. Your skills. I'm a civilian contractor, Sarah protested. I clean weapons, I don't use them. Mitchell turned back to her, his gray eyes intense. Elena, I've seen your father's training records. I know what you're capable of. And frankly, we need someone exactly like you. That's not who I am anymore, isn't it? Mitchell challenged. You can change your name, your background, your whole life story. But you can't change what you are. You're a warrior, Elena. You always have been. Sarah sat down heavily on her couch, suddenly feeling exhausted. For 3 years she had worked so hard to be ordinary, to be unremarkable, to be safe. The idea of stepping back into that other world, the world of danger and violence that had defined her childhood, was terrifying. What kind of mission? She heard herself ask. Mitchell smiled slightly. The kind where your particular background would be invaluable. The kind where Sarah Martinez couldn't help us, but Elena Volkov could save lives. I need time to think. You have until tomorrow morning, Mitchell said, moving toward the door. After that, my team deploys with or without you. He paused at the threshold. Elena, your father spent 12 years trying to make the world a little bit safer. This is a chance to continue that work. After he left, Sarah sat in her quiet apartment staring at the wine bottle he left behind. She recognized the label. It was Russian, a brand her father used to drink on special occasions. The message was clear. Mitchell knew exactly who she was, and he wasn't going to let her hide anymore. Sarah didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat at her kitchen table, staring at the Russian wine bottle and wrestling with a decision that would change everything. By dawn, she had made up her mind. She found Mitchell in the base cafeteria at 0600, sitting alone with a cup of coffee and a tablet displaying what looked like mission briefings. He looked up when she approached, his expression neutral but expectant. I'll do it, Sarah said without preamble, but I have conditions. Mitchell gestured to the empty chair across from him. I'm listening. First, this is a one-time thing. After the mission, I go back to being Sarah Martinez and you forget Elena Volkov ever existed. Agreed. Second, I want to know everything about the mission before I commit. No surprises, no classified details held back. Mitchell nodded. Fair enough. Third condition? Sarah hesitated, then spoke the words that had been haunting her all night. If this goes wrong, if my cover is blown or if I'm compromised, you don't try to save me. I knew the risks when my father chose his path, and I know them now. Mitchell's expression darkened. That's not how I operate, Elena. I don't leave people behind. You do if they used to be Russian intelligence assets, Sarah replied firmly. Promise me. After a long moment, Mitchell nodded reluctantly. Understood. Now let's talk about why we need you. He turned the tablet toward her, showing satellite imagery of a compound somewhere in mountainous terrain, eastern Afghanistan near the Pakistan border. This facility is being used to manufacture and distribute a new type of IED that's been killing our people across the region. Sarah studied the images. The compound was well defended, positioned on high ground with excellent sight lines in all directions. What's the target? The facility's commander is a former Russian military engineer named Viktor Petrov. He's been selling his expertise to whoever pays best, and right now that's a Taliban splinter group with serious funding. The name meant nothing to Sarah, but the nationality was troubling. Why me specifically? Surely you have qualified snipers. Mitchell swiped to a new image, a personnel file photo of a man in his 50s with cold blue eyes and military bearing. Petrov is paranoid about Western operatives. He's built his security around detecting and preventing infiltration by American or European personnel. But he's recruited several former Soviet bloc operators to his security team. Understanding dawned. You want me to get close to him? The facility has a small research and development section where they test new weapon designs. Petrov is looking for a weapons specialist with Russian training. Someone exactly like Elena Volkov. Sarah leaned back in her chair, processing the implications. You want me to go undercover as myself? Modified version of yourself, Mitchell corrected. Elena Volkov, former Russian military, disillusioned with Western life, looking for work that pays well and doesn't ask too many questions. It's close enough to the truth that you won't have trouble maintaining the cover. And then, Mitchell's expression grew grim, then you help us eliminate the threat. Permanently. Sarah had killed before during her training with her father and in the chaotic months before she escaped Russia. But that had been survival. Desperate acts in desperate times. This would be different, planned, calculated, deliberate. How long do I have to prepare? She asked. 72 hours. We'll provide you with a complete background, documentation, and equipment. My team will handle insertion and extraction. Your team doesn't know who I really am. They know you're a specialist contractor with relevant experience. That's all they need to know. Sarah nodded slowly. Show me the rest of the plan. For the next 2 hours, Mitchell walked her through every detail of the operation. The approach route, the cover story, the timeline, contingency plans. It was thorough and professional. Exactly what she would have expected from an elite SEAL team. There's one more thing, Mitchell said as they prepared to leave. Petrov is smart and experienced. If he suspects you're not who you claim to be, he won't hesitate to kill you. This isn't a training exercise, Elena. People are going to die, and you might be one of them. I understand, Sarah replied. She did understand. Perhaps better than Mitchell realized. Death had been a possibility since the day her father first put a rifle in her hands. Good. Report to Building C at 1400 hours. We'll begin your briefing and equipment fitting. As Sarah walked back to her quarters, she caught her reflection in a window and was startled by what she saw. For 3 years she had looked like Sarah Martinez, soft, unassuming, forgettable. But now something had changed in her posture, her expression, the way she carried herself. Elena Volkov was coming back. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. New documents, new weapons, new clothes that fit her cover identity. Mitchell's team was efficient and professional, treating her as just another specialist contractor. Without asking uncomfortable questions, the gear they provided was impressive, a modified SVD sniper rifle that would be familiar to anyone checking her credentials, communications equipment, and enough documentation to convince even suspicious border guards that Elena Volkov was exactly who she claimed to be. The rifle's been modified to NATO specifications, explained. The team's weapons specialist, a quiet man named Torres, but it still looks and feels like standard Russian issue. Should help with your cover. Sarah hefted the weapon, feeling its familiar weight. It had been years since she'd held a Dragunov, but her hands remembered the grip, the balance, the smooth action of the bolt. This felt like coming home. When do we deploy? She asked Mitchell during their final briefing. Tomorrow night. Transport to Bagram, then overland to the insertion point. Once you're inside the compound, you'll have a narrow window to complete the mission before our extraction team moves in. And if something goes wrong? Mitchell's expression was serious. Then you remember what you promised me this morning? You're Elena Volkov again, and Elena Volkov knows how to survive. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment one last time, looking around at the life she had built as Sarah Martinez. It wasn't much. A few possessions, some photos of people who weren't really her family, books she'd read to pass the time. But it had been peaceful. Tomorrow she would step back into a world she had tried to leave behind. A world where violence was a tool, where death was always close, where trust was a luxury that could get you killed. She opened Mitchell's wine bottle and poured herself a glass, raising it in a silent toast to her father. Then she began to pack the few things Elena Volkov would need for the mission ahead. The helicopter dropped Elena at a collection point 40 kilometers from the target compound, where she was met by a man calling himself Ahmad. He was thin and weathered, with the careful eyes of someone who had survived in dangerous territory for a long time. "You are the Russian woman?" he asked in accented English. "Elena Volkov," she replied, switching to Russian. "And you speak my language better than you pretend." Ahmad smiled slightly and responded in fluent Russian. "Better to let people underestimate you. Come, we have a long drive ahead." The truck was old and battered, perfect for blending in with local traffic. As they drove through increasingly remote mountain roads, Ahmad filled in details about the compound and its inhabitants. "Petrov is careful but arrogant," he explained. "He believes his Russian training makes him superior to local fighters. This works in your favor. He will be more likely to trust another Russian than to suspect deception." "How many security personnel?" 15 to 20, depending on the day. Mix of locals and foreigners. 2 other Russians that I know of, both former military. Elena nodded, filing away the information. The closer they got to the compound, the more she could feel her old training taking over. Sarah Martinez was fading away, replaced by someone harder, more dangerous. They reached a small village just before sunset, where Ahmad introduced her to a local contact, who would take her the final distance to the compound. The man spoke only Pashto, but his nods and gestures made his instructions clear enough. "Remember," Ahmad said as she prepared for the final approach, "you are Elena Volkov, weapons specialist, looking for work that pays well. You heard about Petrov through contacts in Chechnya. Keep it simple." Elena shouldered her pack containing the disassembled SVD and her limited personal gear. "How do I contact you for extraction?" "You don't. When the mission is complete, make your way to the village. If I'm not there, wait, but not more than 6 hours," she understood. If she wasn't out in 6 hours, she probably wasn't coming out at all. The final approach to the compound took 2 hours of careful hiking through rocky terrain. Elena used the time to study the facility's defenses, noting guard positions, patrol patterns, and potential escape routes. It was well protected, but not impregnable. The guard who met her at the gate was young and nervous, clearly not expecting visitors. He spoke rapid Pashto into a radio, then gestured for her to wait. After several minutes, an older man emerged from the main building. "You are the Russian?" he asked in accented English. "Elena Volkov," she replied. "I'm here to see Viktor Petrov about work." The man studied her carefully, taking in her worn military-style clothing and the confident way she carried herself. "I am Farid, Petrov's security chief. He is not expecting visitors. Tell him I have experience with advanced weapons systems and I'm tired of working for people who don't appreciate Russian engineering," Elena said, putting a note of frustration in her voice. Farid considered this, then nodded slowly. "Wait here." Elena waited in the compound's courtyard, using the time to memorize the layout. The main building was 3 stories, with what looked like living quarters on the upper levels and workshops on the ground floor. 2 smaller buildings flanked the main structure, and she could see the entrance to what might be an underground facility. 20 minutes later, Farid returned with a stocky man in his 50s wearing expensive clothes and an air of authority. Viktor Petrov looked exactly like his intelligence photos, but there was something in his eyes that the pictures hadn't captured, a cold intelligence that immediately made Elena more cautious. "So," Petrov said in Russian, "you are Elena Volkov." "I know that name." Elena's heart rate spiked, but she kept her expression neutral. "I doubt that. I've kept a low profile since leaving the service." "Have you?" Petrov smiled coldly. "Dmitry Volkov's daughter. Spetsnaz training from childhood. Disappeared after her father's death in 2019. The world seemed to slow down around Elena. Petrov knew exactly who she was, which meant her cover was blown before it had even begun. She calculated distances to exits, weapons, potential hostages, but the situation was hopeless. She was surrounded by armed men in an unfamiliar location with no backup. "I see you understand your situation," Petrov continued conversationally. "The question is, what brings the daughter of a famous traitor to my remote facility?" Elena forced herself to think. If Petrov knew about her father's work with Western intelligence, then her mission was likely compromised. But he hadn't killed her immediately, which meant he wanted something. "I need work," she said simply. "Money. A place to disappear. Your father's betrayal made life difficult in Russia, I imagine." "His betrayal got him killed," Elena replied with genuine bitterness. "And made me a target. I've been running ever since." Petrov studied her for a long moment, then nodded to Farid. "Take her to the workshop. Let her examine some of our work. I want to see what Dmitry Volkov taught his daughter." The workshop was impressive, a fully equipped facility for designing and building sophisticated explosive devices. Elena could see immediately why Petrov's weapons were so effective against coalition forces. This wasn't crude bomb-making. It was advanced military engineering. "Tell me what you see," Petrov said, gesturing to a partially assembled device on the main workbench. Elena studied the mechanism carefully. It was elegant in its simplicity. A pressure-activated trigger with multiple redundancies and a shaped charge designed to penetrate armored vehicles. The kind of weapon that could only be built by someone with serious military training. "Clean work," she said honestly. "Effective design. But the pressure sensor is vulnerable to electronic countermeasures." Petrov raised an eyebrow. "How would you improve it?" Elena spent the next hour walking through modifications that would make the device more reliable and harder to detect. She drew on her father's training and her own experience, carefully balancing helpful knowledge with the need to maintain her cover. "Impressive," Petrov said when she finished. "Your father taught you well." "He taught me that good weapons require perfect understanding," Elena replied. "Anything less gets people killed." "Indeed." Petrov was quiet for a moment, then made a decision that surprised her. "You will stay. We have work that requires your particular skills." Elena nodded, trying not to show her relief. "What kind of work?" "We are developing a new generation of weapons. More sophisticated than anything we've built before. The kind of project that requires someone with advanced training." Petrov gestured around the workshop. "Someone like you." Over the next several hours, Elena was given a tour of the facility and introduced to key personnel. She met the 2 other Russians Petrov had recruited, former army engineers named Alexei and Dmitry, who seemed competent but unremarkable. She was assigned quarters in the main building and given access to the workshop areas. As night fell, Elena sat in her small room and tried to process her situation. Her cover identity was blown, but somehow that had worked in her favor. Petrov believed she was exactly what she appeared to be, a skilled operative on the run from her past, willing to work for anyone who paid well and didn't ask too many questions. The irony wasn't lost on her. By revealing her real background, Petrov had actually made her mission easier. He trusted her precisely because he knew who she really was, but that trust came with its own dangers. If Petrov suspected she was working for Western intelligence, he would kill her without hesitation. She needed to complete her mission quickly before suspicion could take hold. Elena began planning. The facility's routine was becoming clear. Petrov spent most evenings in his private office on the 3rd floor, reviewing plans and communicating with his various contacts. Security was lighter at night, with only 2 guards patrolling the exterior and 1 monitoring the communications room. The SVD rifle was still disassembled in her pack, its components hidden among her personal belongings. She could put it together in less than 5 minutes when the time came, but first she needed intelligence. The mission was to eliminate Petrov and destroy the facility's research capabilities, but Elena wanted to understand exactly what they were building here. The weapons she'd seen were sophisticated, but they seemed to be developing something even more advanced. Late that night, she slipped out of her room and made her way carefully through the compound. The guards were where she expected them to be, their patrol routes predictable and poorly coordinated. Elena moved like a shadow, using skills her father had drilled into her during countless training exercises. The workshop was empty, lit only by emergency lighting. Elena made her way to the main workstation where she'd seen the most advanced projects. What she found there made her blood run cold. The devices were unlike anything she'd encountered before. Miniaturized explosives with sophisticated targeting systems, designed to be deployed remotely and activated by specific triggers. But it was the manufacturing notes that truly alarmed her. Petrov wasn't just building weapons for local insurgents. He was developing technology that could be mass-produced and distributed globally. Elena photographed everything she could with a small camera hidden in her watch, then carefully returned everything to its original position. As she prepared to leave, she heard footsteps in the corridor outside. She froze, calculating options. The workshop had only one exit and someone was approaching. Elena woke before dawn, her internal clock adjusted to the rhythm she'd learned during years of training with her father. The compound was quiet, with only the early morning guards visible from her small window. She had perhaps 2 hours before the facility came fully to life. Moving quietly, she assembled the SVD rifle in the darkness of her room. Her hands worked automatically, muscle memory guiding each component into place. The weapon felt solid and familiar, a reminder of skills she'd hoped never to use again. But first, she needed one more piece of intelligence. During her midnight exploration, she'd noticed that Petrov's office had a clear view of the workshop areas below. If she could position herself correctly, she would have both visual confirmation of her target and the ability to ensure the facility's destruction. Elena slipped out of her room and made her way carefully through the compound. The guards were where she expected them to be, following the same predictable patterns she'd observed the night before. She reached the main building's upper level without being detected. Petrov's office was locked, but Elena had learned lock-picking from experts. The door opened silently under her skilled manipulation. Inside, she found exactly what she'd hoped for: detailed plans for the new weapons system, production schedules, and distribution networks that stretched across multiple continents. The scope of Petrov's operation was even larger than she'd realized. He wasn't just supplying local insurgents. He was building a global network capable of striking anywhere in the world. The devices she'd seen were prototypes for weapons that could be mass-produced and deployed by terrorist cells with minimal training. Elena photographed everything, her small camera capturing page after page of critical intelligence. Then she noticed something that made her blood run cold: a shipping manifest dated for the following week. Petrov was preparing to send prototype devices to cells in London, Paris, New York, and Washington, D.C. The timeline had just accelerated dramatically. Elena made her way to the building's roof access, emerging into the pre-dawn darkness. From here, she had a clear view of the entire compound. including the workshop where Petrov spent most of his time, and the security stations that would need to be neutralized. She set up the SVD in a concealed position behind an air conditioning unit, checking sightlines and calculating distances. The shot to Petrov's office window would be straightforward, less than 200 meters with minimal wind. But she needed to ensure that the facility's destruction would be complete. As the sun began to rise, Elena heard movement in the compound below. The facility was coming to life, with workers arriving for another day of building weapons that could change the balance of global security. Elena settled into position, controlling her breathing as her father had taught her. The familiar ritual of long-range shooting calmed her mind, focusing her attention on the technical requirements of the shot. At 0800 hours, Petrov emerged from the main building and walked toward the workshop, following his usual routine. Elena tracked him through the scope, noting his gait, his posture, the way he moved with the confidence of someone who felt completely secure in his domain. She didn't take the shot. Not yet. Instead, Elena waited and watched, building a complete picture of the facility's daily rhythm. She observed guard rotations, work schedules, and communication patterns. By noon, she had identified the optimal window for completing her mission. Petrov typically spent the early afternoon in his office, reviewing production reports and communicating with his network contacts. The workshop would be fully staffed, but most of the security personnel would be at lunch or changing shifts. It was the perfect time to strike. Elena made one final check of her equipment and settled into her firing position. Through the scope, she could see Petrov's office window clearly. The glass was thick but not bulletproof. The SVD's 7.62mm round would penetrate easily. At 13:47 hours, Petrov appeared in his office window, speaking animatedly into a satellite phone. Elena could see his face clearly through the scope, could read the expression of satisfaction as he discussed his plans for global distribution of terror. She thought of her father, of the years he'd spent trying to make the world safer by providing intelligence to Western agencies. She thought of Mitchell's team, depending on her to eliminate a threat they couldn't reach through conventional means. She thought of the innocent people who would die if Petrov's weapons reached their intended targets. Elena controlled her breathing, settled the crosshairs on her target, and slowly squeezed the trigger. The rifle's recoil was familiar, comfortable, like greeting an old friend. Through the scope, she saw the office window shatter and Petrov collapse backward, the satellite phone falling from his lifeless hand. But Elena's mission wasn't complete. She quickly shifted her aim to the workshop below, where workers were beginning to react to the sound of gunfire. Her second shot struck a large container of explosive materials, triggering a chain reaction that she had carefully calculated. The explosion was massive, far larger than she had expected. The entire workshop section of the main building disappeared in a ball of flame and debris. Secondary explosions followed as stored weapons and materials detonated, turning Petrov's sophisticated facility into a raging inferno. Elena didn't wait to admire her work. Security personnel were already responding, shouting orders and searching for the source of the attack. She disassembled the SVD with practiced speed, packed her gear, and began moving toward her planned escape route. The compound was in chaos. Guards ran in multiple directions, some trying to fight the fires while others searched for attackers. In the confusion, Elena was able to reach the perimeter fence without being detected. But as she prepared to climb over the fence, she heard voices speaking Russian behind her. Alexei and Dmitri, the two engineers she'd met the day before, were approaching her position with weapons drawn. "Elena Volkov," Alexei called out. "We know you're there. Come out slowly." Elena considered her options. She could try to fight, but they had the advantage of position and numbers. She could run, but they knew the terrain better than she did. Or she could try to bluff her way out. "Alexei?" she called back, putting confusion in her voice. "What's happening? Is everyone all right?" "Step away from the fence," Dmitri ordered. "Keep your hands visible." Elena emerged from her concealment, playing the role of a confused civilian caught in a military attack. "I heard explosions. Is it Americans? Should I get my rifle?" The two men approached cautiously, but Elena could see uncertainty in their faces. They knew something was wrong, but they weren't sure what. "Petrov is dead," Alexei said, watching Elena's face carefully. "Shot from long range. Professional work. Elena allowed shock and fear to show on her face. Shot by who? That's what we want to know, Dmitri replied. Funny thing is, the only person in this facility with that kind of training is you. Elena's hand moved slowly toward the pistol concealed under her jacket. If they were going to accuse her directly, she might need to fight her way out. I was in my room when the shooting started, she said. You can check with the guards. We did, Alexei said grimly. No one saw you after midnight last night. The game was up. Elena's hand closed around her pistol grip as she prepared for what might be her final firefight. Elena's training took over as she drew her pistol in one smooth motion, firing twice before either man could react. Alexei dropped immediately, but Dmitri managed to get off a wild shot that splintered the fence post inches from her head. She put him down with a single shot to the chest, then quickly searched both men for additional weapons and ammunition. The gunfire would draw more security personnel soon, and she needed to move fast. Elena climbed the fence and began running toward the extraction point, using the terrain to mask her movement from anyone pursuing from the compound. Behind her, the fires were spreading, sending thick black smoke into the afternoon sky that would be visible for miles. The rocky ground was treacherous, but Elena moved with the confidence of someone who had trained in similar terrain throughout her childhood. Her father had always emphasized that shooting was only half of any mission. The other half was getting home alive. After 30 minutes of hard running, she reached the village where Ahmad had promised to wait. But the place was deserted, with no sign of her extraction contact. Elena checked her watch. She was still within the 6-hour window, but something felt wrong. She took cover in an abandoned building and tried to analyze the situation. The village was too quiet, even for a remote mountain community. Either the residents had fled when they heard the explosions, or something had happened to compromise the extraction plan. Elena was considering her options when she heard the sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the south. She moved to a window that gave her a view of the sky, expecting to see Afghan military or coalition aircraft responding to the attack on Petrov's facility. Instead, she saw a civilian helicopter circling the village as if looking for a landing site. As it came closer, Elena could make out a familiar figure in the passenger compartment, Commander Mitchell, wearing full combat gear and scanning the ground through binoculars. She broke cover and moved to the village's small landing area, arriving just as the helicopter touched down. Mitchell jumped out before the skids hit the ground, followed by 3 other operators carrying assault rifles and medical gear. Elena, Mitchell called over the rotor noise. Are you injured? I'm fine, she replied, running toward the aircraft. But the extraction plan was compromised. Ahmad never showed. Mitchell's expression darkened. Ahmad's dead. We found his body 20 kilometers from here, killed sometime last night. Someone knew about the operation. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. If Ahmad had been killed before the mission began, then Petrov might have been expecting her all along. Their entire conversation about her father's background could have been theater, designed to make her feel confident in her cover while he planned her elimination. Did you complete the mission? Mitchell asked as they climbed into the helicopter. Petrov's dead and the facility is destroyed, Elena confirmed. But there's more. He was developing weapons far more sophisticated than we thought. Global deployment network, targeting systems, mass production capabilities. She handed Mitchell the camera containing the intelligence she'd gathered. Everything's documented there. This wasn't just a local threat. It was the foundation for a new kind of asymmetric warfare. Mitchell studied the camera grimly. We'll need to analyze this immediately. There might be other facilities, other cells that need to be shut down. As the helicopter lifted off, Elena looked back at the burning compound in the distance. Smoke was still rising from the ruins of Petrov's workshop, carrying with it the remains of weapons that would never be used against innocent people. But she felt no satisfaction in the destruction. The mission had revealed how much larger the threat really was, how many other Viktor Petrovs might be operating in similar facilities around the world. What happens now? Elena asked Mitchell over the intercom. Now we debrief, analyze the intelligence you gathered, and figure out how big this network really is, Mitchell replied, and then we shut it down piece by piece. Elena nodded, but something in Mitchell's tone suggested there was more to the conversation. And after that? Mitchell was quiet for a moment before responding. Elena, you've proven today that you're exactly what we thought you were. One of the most capable operatives I've ever worked with. The intelligence community is going to want to recruit you officially. I told you this was a one-time mission, Elena replied firmly. I know what you told me. But after today, after what you've uncovered, can you really go back to cleaning rifles and pretending to be Sarah Martinez? It was a question Elena had been dreading. During the mission, she had felt more alive, more focused, more like herself than she had in 3 years of hiding. The skills her father had given her weren't just tools for survival. They were part of who she was at her core, but she also remembered the cost of that life. The constant danger, the isolation, the knowledge that every mission might be the last. Her father had died for his choices, and she had nearly died today because of hers. I need time to think, she said finally. Take all the time you need, Mitchell replied. But remember what you told me once, you're a warrior. Elena, that's not something you can change just by changing your name. The helicopter flew south toward the coalition base, carrying Elena away from the mountains and back toward a world where she would have to decide who she really wanted to be. 3 hours later, as she sat in a debriefing room describing every detail of her infiltration and elimination of Viktor Petrov, Elena realized that Mitchell was right about one thing. She could never really go back to being just Sarah Martinez. Then the question was whether Elena Volkov had a place in a world that demanded both her skills and her sacrifices. Outside the debriefing room, her cleaning equipment from Camp Pendleton sat in a box waiting to be returned to supply. But Elena was no longer sure she would be the one returning it. Some decisions, she realized, made themselves. And sometimes the most honest thing you could do was stop pretending to be someone you weren't. Elena looked at Mitchell across the debriefing table and made her choice. Tell me about the other facilities, she said quietly. Tell me what else needs to be done. Mitchell smiled grimly and opened a thick folder filled with satellite photographs and intelligence reports. Elena Volkov was officially back in the fight.